View from the Gutters presents Back Matter, episode 5 Point Now. On this episode of Back Matter, our Rose City Comic Con report, and an interview with comic book retailer Patrick Mapp. Okay, is everybody ready to go?
We are ready to go.
Yep, your mom's ready to go.
Your face is ready to go.
Really?
Into the ditch.
Really? Because your mom was certainly ready last night.
Oh, burn.
So, Back Matter.
Yes. Welcome to View from the Gutters presents Back Matter, Rose City Comic Con 2014.
Con wrap-up edition.
Yeah, bro, yeah!
I'm Tobiah Panshin.
I am the father of Audrey Preti.
I'm Kayleigh Fleeman.
And I am the Audrey Preti.
You're supposed to say, I am
Good
the
job.
daughter of Joe Preti.
Dad, shut up. Nobody cares.
Wow.
So we just got back from Rose City.
Audrey thinks we're recording her. Isn't that cute?
It's adorable.
Dad, die in a hole.
And Rose City Comic Con was kind enough to give us media passes this year, which
Yeah.
was very awesome of them. It
It
allowed
was.
us to go down, have a real good time, meet a lot of great people.
Yep, I felt very official, and people looked at me like I was official, and like I had something worthwhile to say,
Yep.
People
which
looked
was
at me.
really exciting.
This,
Well, they thought you were Andrew Chard.
They
Yeah.
did, yeah, and that's actually how I introduced myself.
That's what we told everybody.
Yeah, I told them it was Andre Charda, so, you know.
This morning going in, they had two lines going into the main exhibition area, and most of the people were going into the ticket line, and they saw our badges, and they were like, oh, you get the special no-line. And I'm like, God damn right I do. Mm-hmm. It was pretty great. It was cool. It felt like we had arrived. And it was a sizable con, too. I mean, it reminded me of Emerald City probably 4 or 5 years ago. Where
Oh, more than that, 6 years ago.
Oh, I'm going to say 5. I'm going to stick with 5.
We all know that
Okay.
Toby is wrong.
You know nothing, Audrey Preti.
Oh, really, sir? Really?
Well, no, I think that it was just on that cusp between big enough that you feel like you have to work to see everything, but small enough that you didn't feel overwhelmed. Like one of
Yeah.
the things that you see at Emerald City these days is just tape on the floor marking out lines for people to stand in front of booths because it's so ridiculously crowded and there's so many people there.
Yeah.
And there weren't any of those at this con. Like, I think the longest we stood in line was about 5 minutes, and that was to see Kayleigh Fleeman.
Yeah. And fortunately, she was right next to Matt Fraction, which of course makes sense.
Yeah.
So I just hopped over to his line and waited for like 3 minutes. But yeah, I mean, that was probably, going to the panels, there were some great panels going on. We hit the, what I stands for impact or?
Yeah, I believe so. There were a couple of different image panels that I stood for different things for.
Yeah, and the one I went to was Greg Rucka, Kayleigh Fleeman, and Matt Fraction, and watching them all interact with each other was great.
It was so funny.
But
oh my God.
it also, it's wonderful. Like, we talk about Greg Rucka a lot. He's a great writer. He writes great characters. He's very inclusive in his writing. But to have voices like Kayleigh Fleeman and Matt Fraction, it really fills my heart with warmth and happiness to know that there are people out there that are going, like, this is not a boys club anymore. And like, we really don't care how you feel about, like, if you want to have a conversation about that, we're open to that conversation, but we're not going to be bullied. We're not going to stand here and be and not do what we think we need to do because it makes you feel uncomfortable or because you have some attachment to a character that and the way that character looks or acts. So, it's like, I mean, what Kayleigh Fleeman has done with Captain Marvel is fucking astounding, and she's writing the Western Pretty Deadly, which is pretty great.
Well, she's very brash. And
She
very
is.
bold, and
She is.
she speaks with incredible forthrightness about the issues that confront women in the comic book industry, both
kind of my
as
hero.
creators and as fans. And I mean, I've enjoyed her work before. Like, I like Captain Marvel. I had some problems with the original artist, but since they switched to a different person, I've been following the series. I've been really liking it. Getting to listen to her in a couple of different panels and getting to talk with her at the con today, I think has really elevated her, in my opinion, as a creator. And she's somebody that I'm going to pay more attention to in the future.
Oh, absolutely. Like, I was a fan when I went, but like, she's kind of my hero now. Just watching her speak and the energy and the passion she has, it just is an incredible thing to behold. And it just kind of cements this thing we say a lot about this is an amazing time to be in comics. This is an amazing time to be starting. It's an amazing time to be somebody who's been a part of it for years, because if you can get past the fact that, like, I really think that there are a lot of people out there that are scared about the changes that are happening and stuff, but if you could just see past that, if you could just put down your prejudices, I can't fucking talk. I'm so fucking tired at this point.
Prejudice?
I don't know. Like, we literally just got back from Portland, came up into the studio and started recording.
Toby, pretty sure prejudice is not a word.
So
it is now.
If you
Neologism,
just put down
I
your
called it.
biases and look to see what's actually happening, a whole new generation of writers is going to come out of the movement that's happening now. People that grow up reading shit by Matt Fraction and Kayleigh Fleeman and people like Greg Rucka and G. Willow Wilson and people that stood up and were like, for inclusivity and for changing the status quo in especially superhero comics. That's going to inspire a whole new generation of writers, and the movement is only going to get bigger. And I just think that's
I absolutely agree. I was thinking it'd be cool if we could kind of go around the table a little bit and just kind of talk about what was our experience, what did we see, who did we talk to, like, what did we get? Because, one of the great things about going to con is picking up stuff, getting signatures, getting good deals on books. So, Kayleigh, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I do. First off, I spent way too much money.
Of course.
But, it happens. As long as I can make rent, it's okay. I don't need to eat. No, I went to a lot of panels, which I feel like every time I go to Emerald City, I have all these panels that's like, oh, I want to go to this one. I want to go to that one. But it's so overwhelming to be around that many people that you just kind of miss everything. You just kind of get caught up in being like in the exhibitors hall and in Artist Alley, and then suddenly the whole day is gone.
Oh yeah, there's definitely times where I've been standing online and I'm like, I need to leave right now to make this panel, and to hell with that, I want to meet Jeff Smith.
Yeah, no, and it was fantastic to just be like, oh yeah, this panel starts in 3 minutes. I can hang out in Artist Alley for like 2 more minutes, and I would still make the panel. It was fantastic. One thing that I noticed, and I see this a lot with Emerald City too, is that a lot of the panels are almost like preaching to the choir, which is, I don't mean that in a bad way. It's really nice. It's really refreshing where somebody could say like, we need more equal representation, or, fuck the patriarchy. And then everybody nods along. Just like, yep, you're right. And it's nice to see that instead of...
It was interesting, the tone of the panels, because there was one that was about the toxicity of commentary on the internet. There was a feminism and fandom panel. Mm-hmm. There was identity representation panel. Like, there was obviously a lot of thought being directed at the idea of inclusivity.
Yes.
Of bringing people to the table and saying, we're not going to negate your experience. Like, the whole fake geek girl trope is stupid and wrong and it doesn't exist. And we want everybody to feel like this is your culture. You are a part of this. We want to bring everyone together and going, how can we make that happen? Which I think that's a really great ideology for something like a comic book convention, which is supposed to be bringing the community together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I totally get what you're saying. It's so nice to be in a space with a bunch of people where somebody goes, I'm a white, like, cisgendered straight male, and I have privilege. And everybody goes, yep, right on. And nobody's going, wait a minute, I don't have a job. That means I don't have privilege. It's like, no. Well, this is the thing that happens, right? It's really nice. It was really nice to be in that space. Because the last panel we went to was Kayleigh Fleeman, G. Willow Wilson, David, God, I'm totally spacing on his name, but he wrote, he's writing Manhunter right now for DC, and it's...
Or he just was,
and it's I've heard really good things about it, and Greg Rucka, and they were talking about, inclusion, and they were talking about representation and identity, and it was, like, super cool, and the group, it was a full fucking panel, standing room only. And it was just nice because they were saying things that we all recognize but are hotly contested among certain more neckbeardy parts of the internet. And everybody was like, right on. And I was just like, it's like a nice warm blanket. So.
Yeah. Like you were saying, Kayleigh, it's sort of refreshing that this is now perceived as preaching to the choir, at least at this convention in Portland in the Northwest.
Yeah. And I think it's nice, too, because, you have a more open dialogue. You're not defending no, look, as a white male you have privilege, as a white female I have privilege, you don't have to explain that to someone. You're like, we know this part of the conversation, now we get to take the next step. And it was just so nice to be able to talk about this, and I learned a bunch of new feminism terms that I've forgotten them all now, but if I hear them again, I'll know what they are, which is exciting. But, it was just like one of the terms I can't remember. It started with a P. It referred to the way a woman's butt is up when she's wearing high heels.
Oh, yeah. Somebody, not on the panel, but in the audience was calling it out.
Yeah, and how My Little Pony characters are reflecting that position now, and how the toys are angled ever so slightly so that their butts are slightly higher up in the air. And I just thought, oh my God, that's so cool. That in itself isn't, you could kind of horses' butts are a little bit higher than their shoulders, or whatever. But you can see in this commentary, no, look at this small thing that's happening. This in itself isn't something that's atrocious and evil and awful, but it adds to this entire culture of things that are actively trying to push away young girls from liking My Little Pony or from being included in it. Or, this is a thing that's actively happening that's discounting the opinions of women, kind of talking about how Supernatural isn't taken seriously as a fandom, sort of a thing.
Oh, yeah. Well, if there's a fandom that's largely or exclusively female, then, it's like the No True Scotsman argument. That's automatically discounted. That's not being a real geek. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's we don't count certain things as we don't count women as gamers because we define gamers as those people who play games that men like.
Yeah.
Yeah, your Maddens and your Call of Duties and your shooting, punching, beating the shit out of people games.
And then of course if a woman does play those games, then she's just not like other girls.
Oh, she's just doing it for the attention.
Yeah, or obviously. That too.
She wants to be accepted. Yeah, I mean, we have no room for logical fallacies here at View from the Gutters. So fuck your No True Scotsman logical fallacy because it's bullshit. So, I mean, our listeners are pretty great.
Was there anybody in particular that you talked to on the floor, Kayleigh?
I got to meet Kayleigh Fleeman, which was awesome. There was one guy I talked to, and I feel like this happens to me every single con, where everyone is super nice and lovely and wonderful. I have great conversations with them, especially with a media badge. Suddenly they were very interested in me. But there was one guy who kept And it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know if he's just a rude person or if he was doing it because, like, I'm a woman. But I was talking about, like, View from the Gutters and stuff. And how many listens do you have? How many followers do you have? What's your range on Facebook? And before I could even answer something, he would say, like, we'll talk to your boss. And he had no way of knowing, like, technically I'm, like, an intern or, you know, like, I'm not on the show that often because he's never heard of the show. Like, from his perspective, I very well could have been a part of an all-female panel, which I was the boss of, called View from the Gutters. He had no idea, but he assumed I had a boss. And it was just really awkward and off-putting because I didn't know how to respond to him.
What you should have done is just been like, I am the boss.
Well, I was wearing
And then he
a
would have
name
just
badge
been
that
like-
said Andrew Chart. To be fair.
True.
And did you pick up anything good?
Yeah, I picked up a Hellboy, Masks and Monsters,
Which we discussed on View from the Gutters, God, a long time ago. That's the one that crosses over with Batman and Starman.
Yep.
Good fucking comic.
I'm really excited to read it because I have not yet. I picked up the first volume of Persepolis because I don't own it yet. I picked up Pretty Deadly because I only have a digital copy, and anybody who knows me knows I can't stand digital copies of books. Because
Did you read them on your stupid little phone?
No, I have a giant ass laptop to read them on. I just hate backlighting.
Laptops are not good for reading.
Yeah, and it's
comics.
just like maybe if I had a tablet, it would be better, but I have no interest. So
That's
I like
fair.
books.
And you know, there's okay. First of all, there's if you're somebody who reads comics on a computer and that's how you like to do it, that's cool. I'm not trying to denigrate you here. My personal experience is that the iPad transformed how I read comics because suddenly felt fun and easy to read comics digitally. But there's also it's great to pick up the physical copy and have it there and have it just be this object that you own. Like there is an intrinsic value in that.
Yeah. Well, and my biggest thing too is like I always have like a million bookmarks and Post-it notes where I like scribble something down, either something that like important to the book or like, oh, don't forget you have a meeting at 4. And then like, and they're just all in my books, like hundreds of Post-it notes, which I need to now buy more of because I ran out like 2 weeks into the semester. But, as you do. But that's just physical books. And that's why I love cons, because I feel like I get to splurge on physical copies that otherwise I wouldn't get.
Cool. Audrey, what did you see at the con that you liked?
Oh my god, I met Jen Van Meter. Oh my god.
And you geeked the fuck out. And I had to literally grab you by the shoulders and drag you up
I
to
couldn't
her.
move.
Watching Audrey, who is gregarious and outspoken and
better than you in every way.
wishes she was better than me in every way. Watching Audrey just kind of freeze up because we went to Jan Van Meter's table twice. Like we went and she got like a little thing. It was a Hopeless Savages announcement saying when the next volume would be out, and she got that signed. And then I found a JSA trade that Jen Van Meter had done, and for cheap, and I bought it. I was like, oh, I'll get this for Audrey, and she can get it signed. And it was just like, she just froze. She was like, that's Jen Van Meter. Like, I can't meet her. And I'm like, yeah, she's just a
like,
person,
no,
babe. And she's like, no, I can't meet her. And I'm like, come on, kiddo, it's okay. And just, and this is somebody that like met Jeff Smith, who I am personally like,
He's my role model.
was just incredible because like Bone was amazing and Razzle is also amazing. And was just like, hey, and Jen Van Meter, who's I mean,
Who looks
who I
exactly
think
like one of my math teachers, by the way.
incredibly talented, but I don't think is nearly as well known as Jeff Smith.
No, certainly not.
And it was just funny, and it kind of made me reflect on geekdom and just how everybody's kind of, it's like Hopeless Savages really resonated with Audrey, and so of course the writer of that comic would be somebody that was larger than life in her.
I think everybody has that one author that they're just like, oh my God, you're just
you're real.
Like,
Yeah.
you hung
Oh my
the moon and
God.
the stars. Like, you're amazing. Last year, Claudio from Coheed and Cambria was actually at Emerald City because he writes tons and tons and tons of comics. And I got into his line twice to buy something from him, and I couldn't. I just left. I was like, no, that's too much. Look at that hair. I will never have that in my life. So I just left. I have not met the man yet. They'll probably never come to another con again.
Yeah, certainly that will never happen. Ever.
Ever.
Mr. Chance. Mm-hmm. Audrey, did you see anything else cool that you liked?
Well, I was at the Pop-It store in the thing, and Pina Colada was on, and I was looking at the sweatshirts across from me, because they're sweatshirts, and then I started doing a jig, and the guy behind me was like, nice, and I was like, he thinks I'm older than I am. And so I was just like, thanks. And then being an awkward person, just slinking away to find my father, who, of course, would not move and was on his phone in the middle of traffic. Would not move.
The
I'm not
advantage
kidding.
to being as big as
Would
I
not
am.
move.
You're like a rock.
I am like a rock.
You are a rock.
Yep.
Joe, what did you see?
Well, I was really impressed. I want to say first and foremost, Portland, you've got cosplay game, man.
Damn!
You have some you have the skills to pay the bills, man. I was really blown away by the cosplay. I saw a lot of really good attention to detail, because I'm the kind of person I'm like, hey, if you want to cosplay, that's cool. If that means putting on a Finn hat and going out, whatever, dude. But I am secretly very critical of it because,
Same.
and the thing is if you're the kind of person that's like, oh, this is the hat that my favorite character wears, so I'll wear it, and then that's it. It's like, okay, cool, yeah, right on. But the closer your costume gets to being I guess ideal is the word I want to use, the more critical I become, because those details become so important. And so I'll see people. There was a Cyclops at Emerald City a few years back, and his costume was spot on, except I could totally see where he had used yellow duct tape to make his belt. And I'm like, why would you spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours on the rest of your costume and skimp on this little detail? Come on, man. It's so glaringly obvious. But right the fuck on. He's walking around as Cyclops, and I'm walking around as big fat comic dude. So who cares, right?
Yeah.
But I was really impressed with the cosplay I saw. We posted a few pictures up on the Facebook page.
Quite a few pictures on the Facebook page, and also on our Twitter account.
Yeah, also on our Twitter feed.
Tweeter.
That's cool. And that's we're at View from the Gutters on Twitter if you don't already follow us.
View FRTH Gutters, because View from the Gutters is too many letters.
That's true. Okay, so
and I wanted to make a shout out to Rose City Comic Con for all of the posters all over everywhere saying a costume is not consent.
Oh God, yes. We saw this at Emerald City in March, and we see it at Rose City.
And this is something that has been contentious at other cons. People are like, we don't want the impression that you're going to get groped if you wear a costume at this convention. But that is actually happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
That does happen. That has been a problem.
Well,
and so the fact that they're willing to get out in front of that and address it and be proactive about it, I think is a very good thing. I'm very appreciative of it.
Yeah, I mean, the zero tolerance policy on any kind of harassment is fucking awesome. Mm-hmm. But yesterday there were some great panels. Today, though, I think was my favorite day. We started the day seeing Pinky and the Brain, Rob Paulson and Maurice LaMarche.
Yep.
Found out that Maurice LaMarche has probably the greatest answer to a very standard con question, which is, if you could go back and give yourself advice, what would it be? And Maurice LaMarche's answer is...
He's very animated.
He is very, incredibly, because, I mean, I've seen him a few times now, and he's always very, very animated, is don't do cocaine and then audition for The Simpsons.
With a white ring.
With a white ring around your nose, which is hilarious. But that was super cool. They were an incredibly gracious pair. There was a woman in the audience that was very disturbed for several reasons, and they were exceedingly sweet to her.
Disturbed, like she was very emotional.
Very emotional.
Not mentally disturbed.
Yeah.
She had a child who had passed away at a young age, and thinking the brain was very significant.
And they like got down off stage and stopped the thing and like gave her hugs, and it was just incredibly sweet. And they were just fucking awesome. So we did that, and then I decided I would pick up Pretty Deadly because I too have a digital copy, and I really desperate after seeing Kelly Sue DeConnick speak. I was kind of like just blown away by how awesome she was, and I was like, I'm going to buy this thing, and I'm going to get her to sign it because she's awesome. And I got my picture taken with her, which kind of fanboyed out a little bit.
Mm-hmm. In which they were both doing the duck lips.
Yeah, and I mean, I got some
do the duck lips.
I got some great shit. I mean, I got 3 or 4 Batman trades, a couple I'd been looking for, and a couple I didn't know I was looking for. I got I can't believe it's not the Justice League, which I have been looking for a while. But I mean, like, I think my favorite part was a few months ago, early before summer, I think in late spring, I want to say, there was an incident at WonderCon, and I think we talked about it a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, I think we addressed it very briefly.
But there was a shirt at WonderCon in LA that said, I like my fangirls, or I like my gamer girls like I like my coffee. I hate coffee. Which is fucking disgusting and sickening and awful in every kind of fucking way. And everything I stand against, and everything I think we all stand against here at View from the Gutters. And Greg Rucka took to his blog and wrote a scathing blog post, not just as a comic book writer and somebody who fights against that shit, but as a father and a husband. And like, there was I was incredibly moved by what he wrote and what he said. And I finally, this is the first time I had seen him since, and I was able to tell him that. And he really seemed genuinely touched by my sentiment, which is cool. And I've met Greg Rucka before, and I think he's a great guy. And I think that was, other than seeing Audrey totally geek out, which I think as a geek dad was kind of, and like, they'll be her first kiss and like her first big boyfriend and all that shit down the road. But like her first geek out is like, I was there for that. That's good.
Well, that's good. I wasn't just geeking out. I literally
frozen with fear,
move.
like a deer in the headlights.
I'm not kidding when I say that Toby had to take me from my shoulders and push me to the line to go and meet her. And when I got there, I was just like, hi, could you sign this, please?
In exactly that like, nasal voice.
She was awesome, too. Yeah. She was such a neat woman. I got my copy of Sex Criminal signed by Mad Fraction. And while he was signing it, I said, I wonder, I was curious if you ever think that like 15 years down the road, people are going to be building on the shit you did in Hawkeye. Like that's the impact you had on that character. And he kind of like looked away and he was like, I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, he got a real distant look at his eyes. Like he was going away inside of his mind. He was like, I never thought of that.
And you could tell. And like, I don't know if he's just that good, or if if I really did get him. But Kerbertron had been in line previously to get her copy of FF signed, and she was standing there, and we actually got it signed, Sex Criminal signed to both of us. And he looks at her and he goes, I like you a lot better than I like him. So I was like, okay, mission accomplished. That's what I wanted to do.
Awesome.
So, I mean, it was a great con. Like I had zero expectations, and I want to thank Rose City and for giving us media passes, because it's fucking awesome. And I look forward to going next year.
Excellent.
So what did you see?
Yeah, Toby.
I saw a lot of great things. I went to a ton of panels, which I almost never do. I went to panels with Joe. I went to panels with Kayleigh. So we've covered a lot of that. I picked up a leather-bound edition of Queen and Country Volume 7 for like $4.50, and then immediately went and had Greg Rucka sign it, which was awesome. I picked up a hardback collection of 3 really great Asterix and Obelix stories for like $15. It was half off. And these are like some of my favorite comics when I was a little kid. Like when I was very small, it was Calvin and Hobbes, it was Tintin, and it was Asterix and Obelix. So that was a really great find. I'm super happy about that. I also got to talk to a lot of great people whose art I really, really respect. I got to talk to Evan Dom, who does a webcomic called Rice Boy. I pitched that on the show before. He was very cool. Got to shake his hand. I had a really nice long talk with Chris Baldwin, who does Space Trawler, another webcomic that I've pitched on the show. And I talked to him about his new webcomic called One Way, and about the book deal that I believe that he just signed for another comic that he did. And so it was really great to talk to him and kind of get a little bit of insight on what his career is like from the inside. And I also got to talk to I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Andres Salazar, who did Pariah, Missouri, which Kate has pitched on the show before, and they are doing a Kickstarter for their second volume that's going to be closing in like a couple of days. Like it might be closed by the time this episode goes out. So if it's not, go to pariahmissouri.com, check it out. I've read the first volume. It's kind of freshman effort-y. It's still a pretty good story. He and I had a nice long talk about it, and I feel like there was a lot of consensus between us in terms of what the weaknesses were in that story and what he's doing to build off of that in the second volume. So that was really cool. Got to meet Matt Fraction, got to meet Kelly Sue, got to meet Greg Rucka, got to hang out a little bit with Eric Troutman, who's a show favorite.
Oh, yeah. And
cool guy.
Brandon Jerwa.
And Brandon Jerwa, who I never actually met. Just kind of like looked at him from a distance while having conversations with other people in the same room.
The first time I met Brandon Jerwa, actually met him, I'd met him because he's a good friend of Eric Troutman and Eric's wife, who runs our local comic shop, or one of our local comic shops. And so Jerwa comes in all the time, and we were standing there kind of chatting, and Audrey, who had to have been maybe 10, maybe 9 or 10, we were talking about ninjas and how there's only 2 heroes that can accurately and consistently beat ninjas. One of them is the Tick. And I said that, and Audrey said, and the other one is Batman. And Jerwood looked at me and said, "You, sir, have succeeded as a father."
Dude, okay, as you were telling that story, I don't even remember when the hell this was, but I was like, he's going to say Batman, isn't he? He better freaking say Batman,
because
or else I'm gonna slap him across the face.
Also, we would watch the Justice League cartoon before we would go out to the bus.
Oh my God, Justice League.
And we were talking, there's an episode where Batman shows up in Amanda Waller's house and hands her a towel as she's getting out of the shower.
Which is an incredible moment.
Which is an incredible moment. And we're walking out, and I was like, Batman's so cool. And Audrey goes, yeah, he's so cool because he just shows up and pwns you. And she just said it like it was nothing, and it was just, I lost my shit because it was hilarious.
Yeah, there was that, and then there was another episode. I think it was the same episode, but I was with my mom, and I was like, "Mom, can I say something?" And she was like, "Sure, honey." And I was like, "Amanda Waller's a biznatch," and she looked at me, and she was like, "What did you just say?" And I was like, "Nothing, Mom. Sorry." And it was the funniest thing ever.
That was pretty great. But yeah, so
that is pretty great. So yeah, I mean, I had a great time at Rose City. It's a con on the grow.
Yeah.
It was 2 days this year, and it was small enough that after the first day, I was like, I've kind of seen everything on the show floor. Like, I've been all up and down it. I've talked to all the people I really feel like I need to talk to. Obviously, we're going to go the second day. There are more panels that I want to see. But I think that if you're in the Portland area, if you're in the Pacific Northwest, I think it's a excellent con to go to next year, because it's just going to be that little bit bigger, where it's going to hit that perfect sweet spot where you're like, I have enough to do that I will never be like, I don't know what else to do because I've done everything.
Yeah.
You will make effective use of the entire weekend. And it's just going to be an awesome, awesome show.
Yeah. And hopefully we'll be
that was the trajectory of Emerald City. And at this point, Emerald City almost feels too big.
And Emerald, the directors, 3 of the directors of Emerald City are now on the board of the Rose City Comic Con. So they bring a lot of knowledge as to layout. I love the Oregon Convention Center. It feels very,
it's really,
although if it gets too
really
much bigger,
cool.
I can definitely see problems, but not the same. It's set up in a much smarter way, I think. So,
well, everything was a lot closer together.
Yeah.
There have definitely been times where I've been in Emerald City and I'm like, okay, so I'm on one side of the show floor, and the next thing I want to see is on the other side of the show floor, and it will take me 15 minutes to get there.
Yeah,
And that was not an issue at this con at all.
Yeah. So
A lot of great cosplay, a lot of really cool props. They had a replica DeLorean, they had a Batmobile, they had this awesome MODOK statue, which was all glowy and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
the
The 501st were there. They had a bunch of R2-D2s. Like, it was just a good time. It was a fun weekend. Everybody seemed really happy. And I just enjoyed the hell out of it. I wish that all listening out there in podcast land could have been there.
Yep.
About the cosplay, I was talking to Kayleigh about this, and the thing about cosplay is that, like, it doesn't, like, I appreciate people who do it because they took the time and effort to put into their costumes. But, like, at the same time, it breaks my heart when I see, like, people who have a great costume and then their makeup is just crap. Like, not even, like, I understand that not everyone could be a makeup artist, but, like, the quality of the makeup is, like, just crappy. It just makes me so sad because it's like, you could have had such a great costume, but your makeup just sucks.
Well, I think, that's what I'm getting at. Is like the closer the costume is to ideal, the more the ways in which it is not ideal stand out. But at the same point, you're cosplaying. You had the, like, there's, on Esquire, there's, they do an advertisement for Ninja Warrior where they're like, you know, they're showing all the people that fall into the water, and they're like falling into the water in front of a live studio audience and like millions of people watching at home. But they're like, but you're sitting at home on your couch, so who are you to judge, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that's kind of the way I feel about it. Is I'm like, yeah, you could have made that Jean Grey costume a little bit better, but I didn't even bother to put on a fucking costume, so what do I know?
Where is your skin tight outfit?
Yeah, and I don't wear one because I don't have cojones that big. And
Actually, that brings up a really great point. I was talking with a friend of mine who I've met up. I haven't seen her in years. And she said that going to cons always makes her so jealous because she either wants the body to rock these costumes or the confidence of the people who rock them anyway.
That's kind of what I think is beautiful is that there were all body types rocking the because one of the things I mentioned is there were a few professional cosplayers at OCC, and like I always find myself wishing they, you know, I think
you don't mean OCC, you mean RCCC.
RCCC at the Oregon Convention Center. That's what I'm all confused about.
There you go. Okay, so that is OCC.
Yeah. There were just all these signs that said like OCC everywhere, and I was like, huh? But I think there are there's a large population of professional female cosplayers that when they cosplay, they go for a very specific look. And it always kind of bothers me that they always go for the skimpy costumes because at cons, because I'm always like, why don't you show off your cool, really elaborate shit? Like, that's the time you really want to be like, boom, look at this fucking crazy, like, of course, I'm totally blanking because I'm like, Lady Deathstrike cosplay. Not that anybody is fucking cosplaying as Lady Deathstrike because that's not a thing anymore.
Well, I did want to riff off of that because one of the last, like, really awesome cosplays that we saw, Joe and I were walking together, and he's like, check out that really awesome female Deathstroke.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, I think that's actually Ravager. I mean, their costumes are very, very similar. And he's like, no, I'm pretty sure that's a Rule 63 Deathstroke. And I was like, no, look at the boots. No, it's totally Ravager. And he went over and talked to her and got her picture, which is up on the Facebook page. And he's like, what did you say to her?
As I was like, I've never seen Ravager cosplay, and she goes, actually, it is a Deathstroke. And I was like, yes, I was right. And she goes, it's the eyes. They both have different. They have different eyes that are out. They wear the eye patch on different sides.
And you came back to me and you were like, I was fucking right, and you were wrong, and you were bitching me out. And you know what? I think that is a bullshit thing to bitch me out on because those costumes are so similar.
No, I didn't even bitch you. When you consider how I was like.
But what was it that you said after that? That it was a trans man
Oh God. Somebody was like, who was that? And I was like, you were like, oh, it's a Rule 63 Deathstroke. And I said, no, it's a trans man cosplaying as a Rule 63 Ravager.
There you go.
And I said it like very effortlessly, and then I kind of took a second. I was like, I'm pretty impressed
I
by
had to
that.
Stop and think and like work in my head like how would that actually work out? And however you had said it was like, yeah, that's how it would look. And I was very impressed by that.
I was pretty impressed with myself. I pull it out every once in a while.
So
that was actually probably my favorite cosplay that I saw the whole time there.
I actually think my favorite was the one that I believe actually won the costume contest, which was the Chewbacca.
Oh, that was insane.
Who was
that
like
was insane.
9.5 feet tall.
I don't know that it was actually Chewbacca. Was it actually Chewbacca?
Yes,
it was Chewbacca.
Of course it was Chewbacca. Who,
I don't know, it didn't look like Chewbacca
else
to me.
would it be?
And Kayleigh got her picture taken with Chewbacca, and I think that is also up on the Facebook page.
It will
It
be
is.
very soon.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
When you listen to this, it'll be up there.
Yeah. Facebook was being stupid today.
Oh my God. The
Or
internet
Is
was
it
being
always?
network
this entire
issues we were
weekend.
having.
Yeah.
So, any final thoughts?
Support your local con.
Yeah.
Support your local cosplayer. Be awesome to each other. Comic books are awesome. Great time to be in the industry. Great time to pick up a new book. Matt Fraction is writing like a motherfucker. Kelly Sue DeConnick is writing like a motherfucker. Greg Rucka is writing like a motherfucker. All these people, they're just writing their asses off. Get on it.
They in the club.
Yeah, and
They on flick.
for those of you who who
write
can't
their
make it to a big
comics.
con, it's not the 1980s anymore. Hop on Twitter, check out your favorite creators, send them a line, ask them a question.
Yeah,
Just say
absolutely.
like, "Hey man, I really love your work.
Yeah, exactly.
It matters to me, and I appreciate the fact that you do it."
Even if you don't have a question, even if you've only read one thing they've written, even if you haven't read anything, but you're a fan of what they represent or what they're doing in the industry, let them know, because that's kind of the thing that always hits me, is that I very rarely have met a creator and looked them in the eyes and said, your stuff is awesome. I love what you do. I love what you're doing. I love what you represent, and not had a response from them. Greg Rucka shook my hand today. Matt Fraction shook my hand today. Kelly Sue DeConnick took a great picture with me. And everybody I met and everybody I talked to, they're genuinely stoked to have that. And like Rob Paulson talked about it in the panel we went to this morning about being a part of something that touches somebody's life. Comic books are not just these fucking things. Like, they're not like it was in the 50s. Like
Nobody is in comic books for the money.
Yeah, exactly. And like, the reason people feel passionately about them is because these books mean a great deal to people. They move people. They fucking transport people. People have an emotional connection to them. And if you do that, if you have that emotional connection, thank the fucking creator, because they're the ones that are giving that to you. You know, if you fucking loved Haikatea, shoot a fucking tweet at Greg Rucka and just be like, hey, thank you for that. That meant something to me. If you're a big fan of Captain Marvel, if you're a big fan of Miss Marvel, if you're a big fan of fucking whatever, just, whatever, like, say thank you. Tell the world thank you. Recommend comics to people. Spread the word, because it's only getting bigger, and this movement is not stopping. Like, creators are not staying quiet about this. Creator-owned comics is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and we have more and more voices raised together saying inclusiveness, representation, feel good shit for everybody, not just white guys. Let's do it. And so, yeah, like, I think it's awesome. Creators are people, man. They want recognition and they want validation just as much as everybody else. So, have you hugged your local, favorite creator
Yes,
today?
yes, I have. Yep.
And did you ask for consent?
Yup.
And did you ask for consent beforehand? Because it's important, as we've learned.
Indeed. And now we are all tired as
And
balls.
we're going to go the fuck home and go to sleep. We love you.
Good night, everybody out there in comic book land.
Good night.
Nighty night.
We'll see you next
Weirdos.
time. We love you all.
Peace out.
Bye. Thanks for listening to our con report, everybody. And stay tuned next for an interview with Patrick Mapp, good friend of the show and a longtime retailer of comic books, with some very interesting insights into the industry. Welcome to Back Matter. I'm Tobiah Panshin. And with me this week is Patrick Mapp, a good friend of mine. How's it going, Patrick?
Hey, it's going pretty well.
So one of the things that we talk about a lot on View from the Gutters is we just don't know things. We're pretty dumb, actually. We're not comic writers. We're not publishers. We're not professional in any sense of the word.
Right.
And so there's just a lot of things that we don't know about the comics industry that we're completely speculating on.
Well, you're in good company because that's pretty much everyone else in the comics industry, too.
And so I invited Patrick to be on the show, first of all, because he's a good friend of mine. He's a gregarious man, and I think that he would be an excellent presence on the microphone. But also because Patrick owned one of two comic shops in Olympia for many, 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 many years. The Danger Room.
The mighty Danger Room Comics. Yes.
And so I thought it would be an interesting conversation to sit down with Pat and kind of pick his brain, both as a human being, but also as a comics retailer for many years, about his kind of thoughts on the comics industry, both as it is, as it was, and as it could be. So, Patrick, I guess my first question for you is, how did you get into comics originally? What was the genesis of your interest in comic books?
The original genesis was my older brothers who brought comics home. And they were much older than me, 5 and 7 years older. So when I was about 6, when I was really started reading books, when I was about 6, suddenly I discovered comics laying around. And it was a mixture of DC, Marvel comics, stuff like that. And that was all cool. I dug them. But then they started leaving around the heavy metal and the epic magazines, and like the crazy stuff that you're not supposed to read when you're a little kid. And that stuff blew me away. It was fantastic.
Hey, some of the stuff that you're not supposed to read is the best stuff to read.
Indeed. Stuff that I don't think I would have been exposed to. I mean, I know people who grew up reading comics who never heard of Epic Magazine, and the darker side of like the old Marvel American publications. And that opened up the door to a lot of cool stuff that I never would have heard about.
So what would you say was the moment, if you can pinpoint it for me at all, that you were sitting down, you were reading a comic book, and it went from this level of, hey, this is pretty neat, like Superman's punching a giant robot, to like, holy crap, I need to read every comic book that I can find. Like, this is something that I need to care about. This is something that is important to me.
Well, it's hard to pin down. I can pin it down to when I was about 13. That's when I went and bought my own comics with my own money for the very first time. Rode my bike to a Circle K, bought myself like an ice cream cone and a bunch of comics. I think one of them was X-Men versus Micronauts. And it was it was about the same time that I ended up buying like the first Wolverine comic, and which sadly no longer exists. It's probably covered with ice cream somewhere.
As all good comics are.
Yeah. And that was, along the same lines, my brothers were pushing, like the Dark Phoenix saga and stuff like that on me, and like, oh, check this out, check that out. And it was suddenly like, it was more than just stories, even in the even in the more simple, like, one-shot stories, there was an idea that there was a universe of stories for me to explore. And that really hooked me. I had to know everything. I had to know what was going to happen and what did happen.
That's definitely, I think, a common theme with a lot of people.
Oh, yeah.
And probably one of the big reasons that the DC universe, the Marvel universe have been as kind of omnipresent throughout the 20th century as they were, was this kind of idea like, there's something bigger out there.
Right,
there's a larger picture. And I think that that's part of what makes the Marvel Cinematic Universe so popular, is that people got hepped very quickly from Iron Man on. Like, this isn't just one hero. This isn't just one event. This is an entire universe. And there's more stuff out there that you have no conception of. And that every single movie, every single comic book that you read makes it bigger grander, more important.
Well, sure. That's the theory, and it's great when it works because, when everything works in a continuity or a context, it can feed into itself. And that's really kind of a fan service that I like to, talk about or point out when I see it in movies or in comics or books or whatever. Like, oh, this is cluing people into something else that's bigger than just this one storyline. And that's really fun and really rewarding. But I think... to get back to your question, like what turned me on to comics, because I would drifted away. In high school, my best friend, a guy named Todd Snyder, was the manager at a shop out in Lacey, just down the road, called Who's Comics and Cards. And I knew a couple people that worked there, but he was really the one that turned that from a bookshop into... It was a paperback exchange, and he turned it into an actual comic shop, which subsequently got run out of business after he left. But... he kept trying to get me back into comics, and I was pretty resistant until I hit Watchmen. And,
oh, yeah?
Watchmen was coming out, and he was losing his goddamn mind. And he pushed it in my hands and said, "You have to read this." And he was right. That was probably the thing that turned me on to adult level of smart stuff. And it reminded me a lot of the early stuff that I'd seen, like stuff where there was actual violence and mature themes. And I was like, wow, this is really not like anything else. So that I think is my total answer.
Excellent. So you ended up buying the Danger Room. You didn't open it. You picked it up from somebody else who was getting out of the business. Right. And you did that along with your wife, Kendra?
Yes.
You were married already at that?
That was right before we got married, actually.
Okay.
So that was really risky on both of our parts.
Tell me a little bit about this, because I've only heard from you kind of in vague terms how all of this went down.
Sure.
So first of all, when was this happening?
Let's see. It's kind of interesting. We have to go back further than that.
Oh.
Further than that to really tell the story properly, and I'll do it short. But there were 3 comic shops in town. There was Who's, which I mentioned before, and there was Olympic Cards and Comics, and then they had just started up the Danger Room, and this all happened within a span of a couple years, where the owner of Olympic Cards and Comics was this lady whose son was running the shop. And he was running it into the ground, and there may have been drugs involved, but there were a couple of employees, including a very young lady named Gabrielle Shepard.
Who is the now current
She's the current owner
for, I think, 20 years now?
A little over 20 years.
A little over 20 years.
And she came into work one day. She was walking by, and the gates were closed. Nobody was working. And she went in, and she called up the employees that were supposed to open up, and they said, "We came in yesterday and today, but we couldn't open. There was no money." And the manager, the owner's son, was gone. So she opened it up with her own money, ran the shop, called the owner, and made a deal to buy it from her because, her son wasn't running the shop anymore. He'd cleaned out the register and left town. So she ended up, falling into her lap when she was very young. I think she was about 18.
That is the number that I've heard.
Yeah. And she and a couple of other people were working on it and trying to keep the doors open. And I was the first person she hired. And I'd known her since she was probably 12, and I was 17 years old. And I was friends with her.
Was it a thing you met through school or something?
I was really good friends with her older sister, who was best friends with Kendra, who was later my wife. So
as incestuous as all relationships among geek circles tend to be.
Yeah, it's kind of weird, but and she offered me a job because I was looking for one, and I said sure. And so I ended up working for her for a while, and then the Danger Room was looking for somebody to do some work. And they were partnering a little bit back and forth to help each other out in orders and stuff like that, trying to lump together their resources, and so I ended up working for the guy who'd opened the Danger Room, and I was working for both shops for a little while, and I don't know how much detail I should get into with the terrible circumstances of the Danger Room, but
give me the 1,000-yard stare.
Okay. It was a dark, smelly den of iniquity. It was cramped. The posters covered the walls. There were half naked women everywhere. It was like every kind of, guys club.
Every bad stereotype of a comic book shop you've ever heard. And I've been into a lot of comic book shops that fit that exact description.
It was pretty bad. You had to interrupt, this was shortly, I guess this was right about in the time that Magic the Gathering came out. And
so around 92, I want to say?
Yeah, 92, 93, right in there. And I ended up, I was working there at a time when if you walked in, you would have to interrupt the owner's Magic the Gathering game so that you could buy comics from him, and he might look at you funny when you did. He was a nice guy. He was very charismatic and gregarious, but he was also burnt out. And during the course of my working there, his relationship with his partner, who had sort of opened up the shop with him, fell apart. And he was looking to get out of town and get rid of all of his problems, money and otherwise. So he ended up looking for someone to take over and buy the shop. And he brokered a deal between us and his ex-partner. And we ended up buying the shop kind of for a song. It was nosediving into the ground like a dart falling out of the sky.
Which is funny because this was kind of the crest of the comics boom.
It was kind of like right on that edge of like collectible hysteria. Things were ridiculous. And I was there for the whole madness of like the death of Superman and the birth of the Chromium Age. And I was incredibly cynical and hated every second of it.
As I can well imagine.
But my wife, I actually credit with being my partner really strongly in helping to shape the vision of what the Danger Room became. Because right from the get-go, we wanted to open it up, open the windows up, let light in, make it a very welcoming space. We had kids coming in every day to play Magic. And so we tried to let's make it a little bit more accessible and it can still be cool. We had pinball games. We had video games. There were tables out for kids to come in and play Magic anytime they wanted to.
God, I have a hard time with conceiving it in that tiny little space.
It was,
obviously the listeners can't see, but the Danger Room in its entirety is maybe 400 square feet.
No, it's a little bit bigger than that.
500?
No,
I mean it's teeny tiny.
I think it's less than 1,000 square feet, but it's kind of hard to say. There used to be a back room as well, and we pulled those walls out. But there were actual wooden brackets on the walls that we kept the comics in. So it's like a 14-foot ceiling. So it was floor to ceiling on the walls. There were comics all over the place, and it was really slapdash and it was very funky. It was a very downtown Main Street sort of thing. We had really cool landlords. We had really cool neighbors. It was a really great community. And it was also at a time when there were really cool comics coming out from all sorts of companies at the same time that you had, the weird, like super collectible chromium hologram covers and things like that people were going crazy about. You also had like Bone comics were coming out, the very first of those, and you had all these really cool Vertigo comics that started up, and it was a really, really good time to be collecting comics, to be reading.
We remember the superhero boom because that kind of looms large in our cultural memory.
Yeah.
The death of Superman and all of the big X-Men events and Operation Galactic Storm and all of that stuff.
Right.
But that was all playing catch up with what Image was doing, and there was Dark Horse there and a million tiny little comic book companies that either went bust or got bought out or both.
Right. It was very exciting.
It was a very weird time in the history of comic books, just in terms of the diversity of things coming out that after everything went bust, we haven't seen that again until probably the last few years.
Yeah, I think it's true. I think, it goes through these waves, these crests, and maybe tides would be a good way to think about it. But it definitely felt like things were rushing in and filling a void. And I saw a couple of crashes over the course of my 17 years or whatever in the Danger Room. But even in the past 5 years that I've kept my eye on the industry, definitely a lot of really cool stuff is happening recently, which makes me think that things are, booming again. It's very nice. So
you bought the Danger Room.
Mm-hmm.
This is the era of, big superhero events, lots of collector stuff. And this was probably about eight or 9 years before I moved into Olympia.
Okay.
And one of the very, very first things that I did, I got to Olympia on a Saturday. On that either Sunday or Monday, like within a couple of days, my RA, because I was coming here for college, said, you need to go to the danger room. You need to open a box. And she brought me straight down to the danger room. I got set up.
Who was that? Do you know?
It was Cara Moratti.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I have not heard from in years.
She was great. She, as she would say, she was a good little onion.
That is exactly what she would say. It was, coming from rural Pennsylvania, it was a little bit of a revelation for me, kind of, as she was like the first person that I met when I got here.
Right.
And I don't want to go too much into her personal details on a podcast, but she was, a strange little biscuit.
She was. She introduced me to a lot of really good people, and she was one of those dynamic, nexus of all realities. And, when she first met my daughter, she sprinkled her with fairy dust, It was a good time.
But in any case, my experience with the Danger Room was that it was a very alternative place, a very indie place, like very much about finding kind of those golden little nuggets outside of the realm of mainstream comics.
Well, right. Yeah.
And, being very supportive of alternate comics, small press stuff, local community. There have been a lot of local artists who have kind of shuffled through the Danger Room at one point and another.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm just kind of curious, like, how did that transition happen, or what was it like kind of buying the Danger Room, coming into this huge speculation boom, and then turning it into what it ultimately became, what I'm presuming is kind of what your vision was for the shop?
Right. Well, that's a very good question. I can't say that I didn't come at it from a fanboy perspective. I'm not going to pretend that I'm better or above anybody else. I've written drunken letters to Frank Miller and Alan Moore at 3 a.m. just professing my absolute love of their work or whatever. I've geeked out as much or more than any other comics fan. But, I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up at the time that we did this. We were young. We were 23, 24 years old. It was, the future was really wide open to us. And, this was something that we thought, well, we'll do it for a couple of years. Maybe it won't work out. We'll do something else. It's okay. And we approached the Danger Room like a bookstore. I've always loved libraries. I've always loved bookstores. I love going in and seeing what's there. And I like comparing, like a record store to like a comic shop is a very good example. If you go into a record store and you're looking for records, you probably would be happy to see top 40 stuff, You'd be happy to see Ed Sheeran or, Bruno Mars, Taylor Swift, whatever, Iggy Azalea. You'd be happy to see those things, but you'd want them to have other stuff. You'd want them to have Elvis or Tom Waits. You'd want them to have like small press indie stuff as well, and even stuff that nobody heard about. When I go to a record store, that's what I expect to be. I expect to find treasure, and you can't find that if you're just walking in and seeing only the top 40. And a lot of comic shops were like top 40. You'd walk in and they would only have the popular stuff. They wouldn't have anything else. And one of the first things we did was we got like some chairs and put them around so people could read in the shop. And I think that was like a cornerstone, honestly, just stupid plastic chairs for people to sit in so that they could browse. We'd say, hey, check it out. We wouldn't pressure people. We didn't want people to, come in and live in the shop, but we wanted them to come and hang out and read and find stuff that they wanted.
Well, even that could be considered sort of a revolutionary act on a certain level.
Yeah.
You have John Byrne out there saying, like, if you read a comic book in the shop and you don't buy it, you just stole that comic book. Which I always thought was the most hilarious attitude for a creative artist to have. Like,
sure.
If you don't pay up front, then you don't get to experience this thing.
Right.
Like, that seems so antithetical to me on a certain level of the creative process. Like, you want to share the thing that you've created. You want to get compensated for it, but that's not going to happen if people don't have the ability to browse, to get a sense of what you are and what you're about, and enjoy that and feel like they can share it with their friends without feeling like they're, getting nickel to dimed to death or whatever.
Right. Well, it's it's a difference between thinking of like comic books as being literature even if it's just, just whatever this collectible cover issue of Youngblood might be, right? It's like, even if it's just that, it's
I think
still...
you mean all of the issues of Youngblood. Highly collectible.
Well, the Alan Moore run on Youngblood. Even something that you buy just as a commodity, it still has some sort of intrinsic literary value, even if it's, objectively not as good as something like, I don't know, Mouse, or a work of like written literature, something like To Kill a Mockingbird. You wouldn't want to compare them. You just say it's literature, and that's our take on it. But if somebody wanted to buy a comic and just slab it and put it away forever, I'm sad. It makes me sad to this day. Like, somebody made this, like, and you treat it like it's not a thing to be enjoyed. You treat it like it's like almost like the opposite of treasure. It's not something for someone to discover anymore. It's something to be locked away. And that always struck me as very antithetical to what we were trying to do. And we wanted comics to be an experience, and we wanted to have art and reading be something that was, valued. Not just in our community, but overall. And we would talk to people from other comic shops, and we would tell them what we were doing and how the response was. And the fact that, the first 2 years that we were doing it, we basically ate macaroni and cheese and rice. We didn't really make any money. But after that 2-year mark, we started actually making money. We weren't chasing the dollar. We weren't trying to sell to collectibles and things like that. We were just doing what we wanted to do, and it started to pay off. And that was really, really good. That was a very nice feeling.
That's in my limited experience, that's one of the best feelings in the world, is to do what you love and do it passionately and do it the way you want to do it, and have people not only respect you for it, not only respond to it, but be willing to compensate you in a very immediate way. Well, yeah. And it's a great feeling to be like, hey, I did this thing and people gave me money for it, and it didn't feel like a chore, and I didn't wake up every morning hating myself because I had to go and do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's obviously a freedom in owning your own business, and it's got so many elements to it that are going to make you absolutely insane. But yeah, absolutely. When you do something like what we did with the Danger Room, and we took chances, and we kind of tried to hold true to our vision and make things really good wherever we could see them, just happy and open and very art and literature centric. It paid off. I felt remarkably good.
So that actually brings up something that I kind of wanted to pick your brain about. Mm-hmm. Just on the question of irritation. I'm kind of interested in perhaps what your greatest triumph is in regards to the Danger Room, but also what perhaps the moment of most ire, that thing that most angered or frustrated or upset you over your career as a comic book shop owner. Like, what really... what was the hardest part, I guess?
Wow. Well, probably the biggest triumph, the one thing that I think is the greatest is that the Danger Room still exists, It was successful enough because of my efforts, my wife's efforts, and the people that worked for us and worked there, their efforts. It was successful enough that it was able to continue on. We were able to sell it to former employees, and they're doing a great job. They were able to do with it, things that I was unable to do, which is great. It's fantastic. So it's like, yay! It's like my baby's grown up and it's on its way, and I don't have to do it anymore.
And you didn't even have to send it to college.
That's true. It's true. And so that would be probably my greatest triumph. There were a lot of small things I just feel incredibly good about. And a lot of those are really, they'd be borrowing from the success of of people that worked there. Frank developed the Olympia Comics Festival. He helped establish the reputation that the Danger Room had as an indie-friendly place. We may have set that standard, but he actually did a lot of the work while he was working there to make it actually happen. And that was stuff that, maybe I just wasn't, competent at. I'm a pretty good captain, I like to think, but I'm sometimes a terrible navigator. So I really relied on everyone that worked for us over the years to bring, people in, to bring the store to life. And I'm proud of the friends I've made. When I talk to people that I haven't talked to since high school, they tell me that, Like, it's the people that they went to the military with and the people they went to high school with, and those are the people that they connect with and always have those connections. And me, I live in a town where I can walk down the street and I can see somebody who's an adult that I sold them their first comic book when they were like 11 years old, and I can go, hey, how's it going?
You served on the front lines of the comics industry.
Yeah, this was my way of being in the community. And, we donated comics to like fundraisers, and we hosted events and things like that. But really is that connection of like actually interacting with my community and being a part of it. That was really fulfilling. And as far as annoyance, it was the things that drove me absolutely insane were always the big companies. The worst thing that happened in the history of comics and my involvement was Marvel Comics deciding to self-distribute when they started their own distribution company.
So this is outside of Diamond Distribution?
Oh yeah.
So I, for one, am not familiar with this event at all.
It's a dark time. Back when we first started, we had our choice. There were several distribution companies, and there were two really big ones. There was Diamond, which we didn't actually like, and then there was Capital City, I believe it was called, and we liked them. They seemed to be, they had more local, distribution hubs, and we could call them up and talk to them, and they were real people, whereas Diamond seemed to be very corporate-centric. And so we went with Capital City. And they also carried a lot of smaller publishers, and that was great because we loved getting the small press. And then Marvel decided to go direct, and they bought a regional distribution company on the East Coast and tried to go international with it, and they dropped the ball really, really bad. And this was a time when there was a lot of comic companies went out of business. You talked about the boom. There was a huge speculators market right when we came into the Danger Room. And fortunately, we didn't sink all of our assets into that, because in the subsequent 2 years, about half of the comic shops in the country went away. They just went out of business. And the thing that caused that, I think, that caused the explosion to go away was Marvel Comics self-distributing, and it was a very, very bad thing. Most of the other distribution companies in the world went away because a lot of them were, half of their stuff that they were carrying was Marvel Comics. Capital City Distribution ended up folding because immediately thereafter, DC Comics, Dark Horse Comics, all these comic companies signed exclusive contracts where the distributors gave them sweetheart deals and got them to sign up exclusively. So it was a really bad time for the direct market too. And it wasn't just in the big sphere of things. It wasn't just that comic companies were going away and comic shops were folding. It was the fact that we couldn't get our comics. We lost customers. People would go, "Where's my X-Men comics?" And I'd be like, "I don't know. I ordered them. They haven't shipped." And then we'd have no comics for a week from Marvel. And then we'd have like a month's worth of Marvel comics all at once. And so we'd have no payments, but no money. And then the next month we'd have all this money due immediately. And, it was a very, very bad move, and it was super incompetent. And then when they realized that they screwed up, they just sort of, folded that company and started going back to the only distributing company in town, which was Diamond. And that's how you end up with the market that you've got right now.
Wow. That's actually really interesting. Not least of all because anytime that I've ever heard somebody speak of Diamond, it's much in the same way that I hear people talk about Comcast.
Oh, yeah.
Which is to say that they never have a good word to say.
They used to have good people working for them, but they, as a result of this distribution war, they cut these sweetheart deals, which shot themselves in the foot in the long term. And I believe DC had such a sweetheart deal, they had an option to buy Diamond Comics completely right around 2008, something like that. I don't think they ever made good on that, but it's still there, I'm sure, in their contract, which is just sort of terrible. It was called Heroes. God, I can't remember what Marvel's distribution company was called. I'm sorry.
I'm sure that, like many times on View from the Gutters, you can just go look it up.
Yeah,
it's probably on Wikipedia, or you can Google for it. I'm sure somebody knows, because we don't.
I've kind of pushed a lot of it into the recesses of my mind. It was so bad.
as so many things in the 90s were.
Right. But Diamond shot themselves in the foot, and I could see the repercussions from that over and over again. Back around 2006, they changed their terms for their minimum quantities that were and the minimum prices. I think it was a dollar value, actually. If a small press publisher had a dollar value that didn't hit a certain threshold, Diamond wouldn't list them.
I believe I heard about that at the time, actually. It was one of the first times that I think I was really cognizant of what was going on behind the scenes in the industry.
And it was, if you look at it from like 10 years prior, somebody who would suggest such a thing would have been reprimanded by people. People would have, like from all across the industry would have said, this is a terrible idea. You're stifling growth. You're choking off people's access to the direct market. And, when it happened, people just shrugged their shoulders because by that point in time, they were just used to, this is a monopoly, and Diamond Comics distribution certainly is a monopoly, And I have talked to really good people from there. There are some people that I really like that have worked there and still work there. But overall, the company is just, it's a mess.
So I guess the follow-up question that I always have when we talk about Diamond is, why is there not competition to Diamond? Especially now with so much distribution happening online, your Amazons, your Comixologies, this huge digital marketplace that's evolving, the online shipping, it seems like there would be room in there somewhere for another distribution company to go, we can sneak in here and we can do an end run around Diamond because they're so messed up. And people are going to want to do business with us simply on the basis of we're not Diamond.
Right. And that's certainly possible, but not with what people think of the market is right now. So when you think about a comic shop, you walk in, you might think, there's these small press titles, but there's also going to be these large corporate titles. There's going to be Marvel and DC and all the subsidiaries. And that's what a lot of people think of. Now, it doesn't matter if there's a big publisher, a big book publisher starts publishing graphic novels. People don't think of that as being an alternative to the direct market in comic shops because that goes to bookstores. When we started seeing graphic novels that we wanted to sell show up in bookstores before they showed up in our distributor's catalog, before we could even order them, we got furious and we realized that there was this split happening. And it was a cognitive split somewhere in way up the pipeline from us. The people at Diamond Comics Distribution wouldn't even think about there's an original graphic novel by Art Spiegelman. Maybe the comic shops would want that. Of course we want it. We're drooling at the mouth to get new stuff. But the direct market and Diamond Comics Distribution is locked into exclusivity arrangements. And I think that's fundamentally it. No one wants to change that status quo unless it's giving more breaks and discounts. So the distribution company in my time went from having a bunch of different distribution centers to a few, and they moved actually from where one was in New Jersey to Mississippi because Mississippi doesn't have a minimum wage.
Ouch.
Yeah. And so we went from really bad service to really bad service that was completely unreliable. That was, mistakes were made because they were just paying people whatever they could, whatever they could get away with. It was really ridiculously bad. And, just constantly cutting corners and shuffling people out. But I think that there is a third path or another path that's possible at some point, but it won't be what people expect it to be. You're certainly not going to, unless the direct market completely crashes, you're not going to see things like some other way to get, X-Men or, Superman. That's just not going to happen other than, say, ebooks or online subscription kind of things.
Well, and I think that's a good segue to my next question, which is kind of looking forward a little bit. It seems like the market as it exists right now is largely predicated on floppies.
Right.
Comic book shops selling monthly titles for $3, $4, now $5 an issue for this tiny little number of pages.
Right.
And we seem to be locked into this economic model that doesn't feel very sustainable. And a lot of people are going I'm going to get my comics digitally. I'm only going to buy the trades, and people saying you are killing the comics industry because you're not supporting the model by which the comic companies decide, like, this comic's doing well, we're going to keep publishing it. This comic's doing poorly, we're going to cancel it. And, I think that there is a very legitimate counterpoint to, it's not my fault you have a shitty business model. And then you've kind of got the retailers in the middle of all of that going like, we care about comics. We want to put comics into people's hands, as you yourself did.
Right.
But you've got this incredibly fucked up diamond monopoly that makes it hard to run a sustainable business when you don't get your comics on time when you're supposed to, when people are expecting it to.
Right.
And so I'm just kind of curious in that like whole muddle of concepts, like if you got to play king of comic books for a minute and go, okay, this is how it's going to go. This is the path that comic books as an industry, as a community is going to take. And this is going to make us sustainable. This is going to, bring us forward into the 21st century. Do you have any sort of idea of like kind of what you would do?
Yeah. I have too many ideas, but let me just say that back when I started working in a comic shop, there were comic shops out there that didn't have cash registers. This was the 90s, all right? This wasn't like the 70s or 60s. There was actually a huge movement that had just happened with a couple of people in the comics industry to get comic shops to have cash registers. It wasn't until this century that there was a viable point of sale system for comic shops that was mass marketed, and that was created by Diamond Comics to sell to the direct market to comic shop retailers. So there's a huge amount of really small scale, low tech, very much independent by their bootstrap sort of thinking in the comics retailers. There are people I've heard people who own comic shops argue that they don't need to have a telephone. They don't need. I'm dead serious.
I'm making a face at Patrick because that doesn't seem like a thought that a human being could have in the 21st century.
Yeah. There's a fiercely independent way of thinking about comic shops from people who own them and run them and work there, and people that shop there. And there are as many ideas about how to consume comics as there are comics. But if I were the king, as you say, I would take different models from different places that have worked very well. You could take a note from the Japanese and the way they deliver their manga. Phone book, cheap printed paper. You get a little bit of a story for just a couple bucks of a ton of different stories in different genres. When something is successful or popular, it gets made into its own series, and it gets fully supported by the publishing company.
Which is a model that I've suggested in the past. That I like the idea of the kind of the anthology model, as I like to call it.
And, different comic companies have floated different things along those lines before, but it's never really taken hold in the buyer's hands. It's really hard to sell consumers on it when they're used to this particular model, which brings me to another aspect, which is the comic companies and the distributors have decided long ago that they're not actually trying to get kids to read comics. They make a lot of noise and they do a lot of little things about it, but their main money program doesn't come from little kids buying comics. How could it? A comic book costs $3 at the minimum. If you want to buy Spider-Man,
if you're lucky,
some comics, you're having to buy a couple different titles a month just to keep up on what the storyline is. You're talking like no 12-year-old kid is going to be able to spend $10 to $20 a month on their comics supply.
And that's just buying 2, maybe 3 comics a month.
Right.
That's not even taking into account like, there's, Batman Eternal every single week and Future's End every single week and all of the tie-ins and then all of the, I have to buy 3 different Superman titles and Superman's crossing over with Superman Wonder Woman this month, so I got to buy that one.
Right. And I think that if you were to approach it more like HBO approaches things, right? Good example is True Detective. Regardless of what people may think about the show itself or the way that episodic nature of telling a large story, it's a chapbook approach to comics or to a storytelling. You could do the same thing. DC could decide we're not going to have an ongoing Batman series. We're going to have Batman year 2015. And starting with January's issue. It's going to be part 1 of a 12-part story. At the end of that year, there's going to be an annual, or maybe in the middle of the year, there'll be an annual, like a big special, large size. And that'll be one artist, one writer team, and that'll be the story. And then the next year, it'll be a different team. It'll be a different story. Maybe it will refer to previous year's worth of work or a different continuity, or maybe it'll be its own thing. Maybe it'll be more like Adam West that year. If people don't like it, they won't buy it. If people do like it, they will buy it, and they will buy the book. If I had the option of like signing up just to get Grant Morrison's Batman forever, I would do it in a heartbeat. And I know I'm not alone. And if the next year, if it was like Jeff Loeb, I would go, oh, okay, they're doing a Jeff Loeb decision this year. That's fine. I'll go throw my money elsewhere. And that would be so easy to do from an editorial standpoint, and it would be easy to do marketing wise. It's like, it would be like pitching movies almost. You'd have to sit down, conceive of a plot, and have a run out, like, say, with a miniseries or a TV show. You'd have to have a chunk dedicated to just this plot. And, then you could play around with other things, off of the sidelines. You could have tales of Batman or, adventures of people that Batman once knew kind of thing.
This is something that Brandt, who's a regular on the podcast, has kind of advocated for. And you're familiar with Brandt.
Oh, yeah, of course.
The idea that you kind of got, you've got both. You've got your continuity book where things are happening and events are changing and a character dies and then they're dead and then things move on and the world is constantly changing. And then off to the side, you have the iconic series where it's Superman or Batman or Spider-Man in kind of their iconic setting where nothing really changes, and just every month or every couple of months or whatever, a new iconic Superman book that comes out that tells a Superman story that's in no way connected to the continuity. It's just, here's Superman and he's fighting a giant robot or doing whatever it is that Superman does.
Right. Well, and I think there's room for that too. You could do a lot of things, but I guess when I think back, what are the greatest Batman comics? I'm not thinking about, any particular given Jim Lee, penciled issue
Batman
or something like
621.
that. Yeah. Like, I don't really give two tugs, right? It doesn't matter to me. But I think about, Dark Knight Returns or The Killing Joke. I might think about The Long Halloween. I'm going to think about these things that are a story. When people say, what's The Killing Joke about? I can tell them. When people say, what's The Dark Knight Returns about? I can tell them. When people say, what's the Batman comic series about? What happened in issue 621? I'm like, who gives a shit, really? And the same thing happens with Marvel, but it's kind of worse. Marvel tends to be a huge muddled morass of, soap opera stuff, which is great, but it's hard to point to things that are like events. It's easy to go, you can go, like the Civil War series, for example, that happened with, the War on Mutants and stuff like that. You can do all sorts of little events, but they're a lot harder to conceive of. And I think that the comics industry has seen a huge positive response from this and has not stepped up to the plate. I don't think they're going to step up to the plate. It's easier to try to just put an issue of the Hulk into the hands of a guy who just wants to see the Hulk smash something. And there's nothing wrong with that. But, it's not forward thinking.
That's fair. I guess my question to that then is, how does it end? Do superhero comics just kind of peter on for another 10, 20 years, slowly getting smaller and smaller in the way that things like Analog and Asimov, the old like science fiction literary magazines, have gotten kind of just become a shell of their former self? Or do you think that there's kind of a point where it goes out with a bang where your Disneys or your Warner Brothers, your corporate overlords go, okay, guys, you've got all of these IPs that have proven that they can be incredibly popular and very profitable for us, but what you're actually doing in the comic book space is us flushing money down the toilet, so we're going to pull the plug on you. You are done. And we're just going to completely wipe the comics industry clean and start up with something new that we think is going to make us some money.
Well, it's kind of interesting.
Or, is there a third option that I'm not considering here?
Well, maybe about 10 years ago, people were talking about, what's going to happen with comics in the future? Is there going to be an end to comics? Because there was all this talk about comic companies going out of business and things like that. And there was a lot of speculation about the future of comics. And I had a revelation that, no, comics are going to be fine. Comics will always be there because all comics are fundamentally, and this really, really gets me, is it's lines on paper. My son, who's 6 years old, makes comic books. My daughter made comic books. They might not be the comic books that you're used to seeing, but you can't simply end sculpture. You can't end dance or rock. It is a fundamentally punk ethos to comic books. You just need paper and some way to mark on it, and you've got it. That's it. Doesn't matter if it's one copy or a million. Comics will continue on. So the real question is, are your favorite comics going to continue on? And the answer is no. Fundamentally, unequivocally, no. I think the industry is doomed, and I think that it will have to change, but it's not going to be like a smart captain smoking a pipe at the prow of a ship saying, let's avoid that iceberg and go that way. It's not going to happen that way. It's going to happen because there's going to be a day when there's a hiccup in the economy and suddenly comic shops go out of business. So Marvel will have to open up its own comic book shops. And confidentially, they're going to screw it up. And somebody's going to step into the void and say, we can do this better. And it's going to be a combination of some features that we don't see. It might be part physical floppy copies and part digital, but it's going to be a different marketplace. And that's not to say that comic shops are going to go away. I hope not. I mean, I love comic shops. It's, when I go out into town, I want to go to the comic shop. That's where I want to go. So I want comic shops to be around, but they're going to have to change. It's going to, people say the bookstore market is dying, but I don't see that happening. I see bookstores struggling, but they're still there. People want books.
Well, the bookstore model certainly is struggling, but reading isn't going away.
Absolutely.
People read more today than they ever read in the past. Yeah. I just read a study recently talking about kids. Kids write more today than my generation ever did because my generation had telephones. This generation has texting.
Sure.
And what they do with it may not look like, Shakespeare to you or I. They're talking in a whole other language. They're developing entirely new ways to write that are neither right or wrong. They just are what they are. But these kids are using the written word far more and in far more different ways than you and I ever did.
That's true. And I guess, even just 10 years back, it would be impossible to predict exactly what, Snapchat or Instagram would do to our communication, just those, for example. And, it's so amazing just how much texting and the instantaneous communication has really taken hold in the way kids especially communicate with each other. And I think similar things happen with other media, different ways of communication. It's, we really don't know what it's going to be like. But for me, when I sit down to read, I still read on paper. I can't get into digital reading. I'm not a dinosaur.
This is not an advertisement, but man, the iPad changed my life. The difference between reading on a computer screen and reading on a tablet that you can hold and move and twist and lie down with, it makes all the difference in the world. And those screens are going to get lighter, more flexible, more indistinguishable from paper until, we're 90 years old sitting in the old folks' home and we don't even realize that this isn't real paper. This is, digital paper. You buy a book and there's only one page in it because the page just keeps changing.
Right. Well, I think that's a possible future, but for me, I've tried the iPad. Still don't dig it.
That's fair.
I like my paper. I like the feel of it. I like the smell of I like the smell of comic book ink. It's a good thing.
There is definitely something to be said for just the feeling of having, wanting to have a high quality object. There are multiple cases where there's a comic book that I own that I've had copies of on my shelf for years, and a brand new hardback edition comes out on really nice paper, and maybe it's oversized, and it costs $120, and I'm just like, I gotta have that. it's just so nice.
Right.
Like that desire to kind of own an object above and beyond the content that's inside the object. I think that there's still something of value there.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when I pass a free box on the street, and I see books in there, I can't resist poking around, and I oftentimes go home with a brand new book that I'd never heard of before. It just grabs my attention. And, I'm out of book space, in my bookshelves.
That is a problem that has never been solved.
And,
as I mentioned on the show many times, my parents are science fiction writers.
Yeah.
And I grew up in a house where there were books in every single room of the house, including the bathroom. And I don't just mean like there's a book sitting next to the toilet so that you can read something while you're sitting. I mean, literally, there was a chair in the bathroom just with stacks of books on it because they had so many books that every bookshelf was filled up. And then there were books in front of the bookshelves. And then there were books just wherever you could stack them.
Right. That sounds like heaven.
It was an interesting house to grow up in, I'll put it that way.
Whereas I grew up in a house with one bookshelf. That was it. And that bookshelf was in my bedroom, which was fortunate, but it stocked all of the kids' books and all of the other books. And I guess it's not true. There was one small bookshelf that we had in our house by the front door that was filled to the brim with National Geographics. And there were boxes of National Geographics around because that's what happens with National Geographics. But I was very lucky to have those. But the bookshelf was in my room near my bed, and that was super lucky for me. But yeah, I grew up in a house that didn't have a ton of options for reading. And I think that drove my thirst for reading even more.
Cool. Very cool. Yeah. So I guess I've got one more question that I kind of want to wrap things up with. And it's a topic that's gotten a lot of heat in the community in the last year and a half, which I think is generally the issue of representation in comic books, and specifically the way in which women are treated in the community and the way that they're spoken of and spoken to. And I have to imagine that this is an issue that you've pondered over at least somewhat, given that, you co-owned a comic book shop with your wife for many years. Your daughter was a frequent presence in that shop. She's grown up reading comics, drawing comics, appreciating comics. And so I was kind of just curious as to what your sense was of this conversation.
Oh, the conversation in general, I think it's well overdue, well needed, and it's kind of about time that we sort of, as an industry, the comics industry matured and kind of moved past its like boyish club aspects. One of the first things that I mentioned that we did with the Danger Room was we tore down the posters of half-naked women, and we opened up the windows to let air in and light in. And when you talk about the reading public, well over half of the people who read books and other stuff in this country, comics, magazines, whatever, they're female. And it was something that we were really proud of in our shop, was how friendly it was towards female customers. And the fucked up thing about it is that all we did was make it not offensive. That was it. And somehow that put us a cut above everybody else. That is stupid and wrong. Like, when you should be lauded for not having naked chicks on your walls, like, that's, I don't understand. I mean, I do understand because I've been to comic shops that were creepy. I've been to comic shops that made me not want to touch anything. And I know what the industry standard is like, and I know what the mentality is. I think it's horribly stuck in the past. I think it's at least 20 years in the past as far as the editorial stances and the boys club at the top. When you look at the industry and you look at who's writing, when you look at who's publishing and who's in positions of administration, you're looking at the people that grew up with people from a previous couple of generations. And you're looking at something that from the top down is sexist. Well, I can't say it's sexist. I can't say that, but it certainly is not inclusive. And that's been something that's been written about and talked about a lot. And I think that it is, it's not inherent in the comics community. When I look around at the people that read comics and talk about comics online and in person, I see a lot of women, and I see a lot of smart, inclusive people. I don't see a lot of Neanderthals, right? I don't see dumb, misogynistic people very much. And there certainly are there. And some of them think that they're being cute and funny about it, and they don't really take it seriously. But it's really not that hard to not be a jerk. And if you're a guy and you're in the comics industry, you don't really think about it. It's whether you call it white privilege or whether you call it male privilege or whatever you want to do. People don't see the things that they get in their template for free. John Scalzi, I believe, put it quite well in one of his blogs that you start off with a whole host of advantages in this country if you're white and you're male, and you don't notice them because you don't have to pay for them. And when you're not white and you're not male in the comics industry, you do notice that those things aren't there. And I think that, like a lot of things, it shouldn't be a really huge leap to be a decent person.
That's 100% fair. And I think, just on a personal note, the best way that I've ever heard it put is in reference to coffee. If you can afford a cup of coffee, you need never pay for one. There's coffee everywhere. You work a job in an office, there's coffee there. You go to a conference, there's coffee there. You stay in a hotel, hey, there's free coffee. Like, everywhere you go, you're surrounded by free coffee. You're a guy out on the street, you can't afford a cup of coffee, nobody's going to give you one. You got to scrape and you got to scrounge just to buy that one cup, just that one moment of sort of peace and harmony, if I can put it in that way.
Clarity.
And I think that is a specific case of something that people generally don't necessarily appreciate, is that all of the things that you think are obvious and natural and just there, like you can reach up into the vines and pluck down a piece of fruit, and you need never consider where that tree comes from, who owns it. Like, those just aren't things that exist within your universe until you are in a position where you don't have that privilege, where people aren't just handing you, oh, please help yourself to a cup of coffee. Like, you actually have to consider, like, how am I going to get through my day? How am I going to get this thing that I need or that I want? And in the sense of the comics industry, I think it's that level of recognition that your experience with this thing is not everyone's experience with this thing, and that you need to be conscious of what you're saying, what you're doing, how you're acting, how you're treating the people around you, and that just because somebody's saying, like, hey, there's a problem here, that's not necessarily an attack on you. Because I think that there is kind of a common, how do I want to put this exactly, an urge or a habit amongst geeks as a people to conflate this is what I like with this is who I am.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And the defensive impulses, defensive reactions when it comes to, that sense of identity can be pretty strong. To a guy who just wants, or a gal who I just want to go to the comic shop. I want to get a comic book where somebody punches somebody else and it's funny. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. And they're like, I don't want to be part of this overall discussion. And that's totally cool. I get that. And there are people out there that are professional umbrage takers, and there are people that really make a lot of hay over nothing. But if there wasn't something there in the pot to be stirred up, they wouldn't really have anything to do. You can argue that there's always going to be issues with sexism and racism and classism in this country, and it's true. But I don't know. I kind of see them. I kind of see from a perspective of like an industry, from the top down or from the gutters all the way up, if you will. There's work to do, and people, if you see something that is wrong, you should point it out. If you see something that is just a blatant exploitation on, like, a comic cover, register your offense. That's all. You don't have to go to war necessarily, unless that's what you want to do. But, there's certainly, from my perspective, when I was making those buying decisions for what I wanted to put on the shelf, what I wanted to promote, I when I saw, like, you know, Power Girl, for example, and, you know, 90% of the cover is just her cleavage, you know, I did not want to put that on the shelf. I didn't want to put that, like, at eye level where kids were going to come in and see it. I didn't want it to be front and center in what I was putting forward. I had no problem with the comic itself. I had really no problem with the art design or anything like that. It was really a matter of marketing. It's like, do you want to lead with that? Is that what you want to say about your industry, about your product, about your position in the comics world? And for me, that answer over and over again was, fuck no. Like, I want something that's not going to make people feel icky. I want something that's going to make them think that comics are cool and that comics are, you know, an art form, something I want to get involved in.
Awesome. So last question, real quick. One of the big things on View from the Gutters is that we're all about, you know, what are you into? What are you reading? What do you like? And why? So I guess my last question for you is, if somebody came in and said, I know nothing about comic books, I am a blank slate, what do you think I should read? What do you think that people out there should read? What comic do you like that you're just like, everybody should take a look at this? What comic would you pitch to me if you could pitch me any comic in the world?
Wow, that's a hard question. I do have, or I used to have, like a pretty set stock of like my best and favoritist pieces of work, but I'd always try to pick out, like, what's your sensibility? Are you a cynic? Are you an optimist? Are you somebody who reads books? Do you never read books? You know, what kind of music do you listen to? And I would try to get a groove on someone from that perspective, you know. And I'm a black-hearted, cynical individual deep down, and so the stuff that I groove on is stuff that's always like thought-provoking and a little disturbing on a level. So things like, you know, authors like Alan Moore frequently, or Grant Morrison, or Warren Ellis, or Garth Ennis, you know, are all writers from comics that I really push people towards because there's always something there. If I thought someone who had never read comics before really wanted to show them sort of the breadth of what you could do with it, I might show them something like Blankets by Craig Thompson, which I think is a really very cool, delicate sort of introduction to what you can do with the space of storytelling in comics. Or I might show them Mouse by Art Spiegelman, because it's got such a gravity that it pulls people into it, and you can't stop reading about it because it's real. It's on the surface, it might not be all that serious, but once you get sucked in, it takes you in and breaks your heart. It's fantastic. But, you know, honestly, the best thing I could do is sit you down on a couch with a cup of tea or a cup of coffee and give you a stack of books and go, yeah, take a look, see what's interesting, and then just let you go to town, because that's what I did in the shop. I would get a feel for what kind of art style they reacted to, what kind of stories, and then just hand them some stuff. Oh, well, maybe you're a Stray Bullets person, or maybe you're a Strangers in Paradise person, or, you know, maybe you're a Madman person, or maybe you're a Hellboy person. You know, I would just try to get a sort of a sense and just round it down. And almost all the time it worked. People would take a little time, they'd browse, and they'd find some things that they wanted to take a gamble on. And oftentimes it was surprising to them. They'd go, you know, I'm really into horror movies, but all this stuff just turned them off. All the dark stuff. What they wanted was something bright, you know, or they walked away with Bone, you know, which is,
can't go wrong with Bone.
Well, no, not at all. I think it's perfect.
I don't think I've ever met a single person who didn't like Bone.
I met people who were thinking it was a kid's comic, and were a little bit taken aback when they realized, oh, no, it's just accessible to kids. There's a big difference.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. But that's my answer. I would just throw a wall of comics at a person and whittle it down until I found the right one.
Well, hey, that's what we're doing.
Yay.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Pat. It's been great talking to you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been great talking to you.
And maybe we can have you back on the show at some point.
That would be fantastic.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Namaste.
Thanks for listening to our show, everybody. Special thanks to theouthousers.com for posting our episodes. You can always keep up to date with everything we're doing by checking out our website at viewfromthegutters.com. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel as we post new videos every week. You can like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter at FRTH Gutters, and please be sure to leave us an iTunes review. as it really does help new listeners find the show. And thanks again for listening, and as always, keep reading.